Hello and welcome to SimCast, the Higher Education Simulation Podcast. My name's Lawrence Hill and I'm the chair of the Simulation Group in the School of Health Sciences at UEA Norwich.
Hello everyone, my name's Tony Jeremy and I'm the Academic Lead for Simulation-Based Education at UEA Norwich.
This episode is actually the first of three in a short mini-series, which is our brief learner's guide to simulation. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely correct, yeah. So we've created this mini-series to hopefully give learners a better idea of what simulation is about. But it also might be useful for educators as well and to put on their different course sites.
Yeah, we hope so. We hope it will provide a useful resource for learners and educators alike. And in this episode, we're going to be focusing on the briefing.
If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a like. Equally so, if you didn't like the episode, give us a dislike, but let us know in the comments why, because we're always keen to improve. To keep up to date with all things Sim, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to check that notification bell. And SimCast is available on all popular streaming platforms.
So, as you said, we're producing these three episodes to give learners a better idea about what simulation-based education is about before they come to participate in it.
Yeah, so you're new to healthcare, student on a higher education or further education course where simulation is part of your learning that you do.
Yep.
But you're like, what is it all about? I might have heard of the term, but I'm not 100% sure what it's about.
Exactly. So we've got a couple of intended learning outcomes for this particular episode and that will stretch across the next three episodes. And these are to describe the three phases of simulation-based education delivery. That is the briefing, the action or the simulation part, and the debrief. To consider what you need to think about in preparation for simulation, and to recall the key elements of the briefing.
Great, thank you. So I guess I'm going to play the role of a student in this, and I'm going to ask you as the educator to sort of explain some things for me.
Great.
So the first question I guess I need to ask is, what is simulation?
Yeah.
Because I probably will have heard it, probably be on my timetable, but I might not be 100% sure what it is.
So in this context, simulation-based education is basically a teaching method that's employed in healthcare education, which uses real life or lifelike scenarios, often based on real experiences, that encourage the development of professional skills and knowledge and attitudes. And when we talk about simulation, we mean simulation-based education, and that is comprised of three parts: the briefing, the action or the simulation phase, and the debrief.
Okay. So today we're going to look at the briefing phase.
We are going to focus on the briefing. We're also going to pick up just a couple of frequently asked questions that we get from learners ahead of their first simulation sessions.
Okay, great. So I turn up to my first session and I have to arrive for a briefing. So first, is there anything I need to consider before I arrive at the briefing?
I think there's a couple of things to consider. I think the first thing to consider is, what should I be wearing?
Okay.
Like, to be honest, let's face it, you get out of bed and your preparation for the day simulation events starts before you get to the centre where you're going to be doing the simulation.
I think the key here is this is a physical activity, a physical way of learning.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't have to be super physical. Sometimes simulation might just be a conversation that we're having, but it is a physical or a practical activity that we're taking part in.
Yeah, there's going to probably be some element of movement or physical involvement in the simulation.
So I guess the take-home message is dress appropriately.
Yeah, the truth is that if you're a new starter on a health education program, there's a very good chance that wherever you're going to be studying is going to have some kind of institutional guidance on what is appropriate. There might be a uniform policy, there might be a standards of dress policy, you might be wearing your trust uniform if you're an apprentice,
and actually,
for example.
It's in some simulation environments you might have to wear a uniform, and that might help with buy-in and believability of that scenario that you're potentially taking place in.
And it also might have very real safety implications as well. Okay. So there's a couple of things to be thinking about. Like, for example, if you're your background is as an ODP, if you were on an ODP and you knew that you were the simulation you were going to be doing was going to be involving getting scrubbed in for surgery.
Yep. So that would mean hand washing, putting on gloves and gown, latex gloves and gown.
Probably best not to be wearing lots of jewellery.
Probably,
in that situation, because you're going to have to take it off and you have to put it somewhere.
Yeah, and when you go into a hospital, it becomes an infection control issue and it's part of their uniform policy. Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense.
If, like me, you're a paramedic or you're coming onto a paramedic program and you know that today you might be doing some basic life support, it's probably best not to wear a puffer jacket.
Because you're going to get hot and tired very quickly.
Exactly.
And again, I guess if you're doing something like moving and handling, which is a mandatory training which all students have to do, you're going to be moving bulky equipment, maybe moving beds around and stuff. Probably trainers instead of sliders.
Yeah, I'll go with this. Definitely go with. I nearly said go with the sliders. Definitely the trainers is the good option, and also the same might be true if there are sharps involved in the simulation exercise. You don't want to have anything that's got open toes.
Yeah.
Because whether that's
it's
flip flops or something, it's a safety issue.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So dress appropriately.
Yeah.
Anything else I need to consider?
Yeah, I think your preparation, your thinking needs to start before you get there.
Okay.
And I think if this is the first time you're engaging in simulation, you're likely to be a little bit apprehensive, perhaps a little bit nervous. So that's going to be compounded if you're running up till the last minute. Okay. So I think getting there in good time.
Be prepared.
Be prepared, but getting there in good time, being relaxed, being ready to go, being, focused. You might need to find the right room you need to be in, and stuff like that. You don't want to be rushing about and adding to that sense of tension.
And what we're going to discuss in a minute is what the content in the briefing is. You don't want to turn up halfway through and potentially miss some important things.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And a couple of other things I would say, probably like most training and education or events, you might need some sustenance. You're going to be thinking, you're going to be using up lots of energy. Make sure you've got something to drink and something to eat with you.
You had a good feed in the morning.
Exactly. But also preparing yourself in terms of being ready to take notes and to be an active participant in learning.
Even though it's a practical, still pen and paper.
Yeah.
Notepad. Might want to take some notes down, drop some bits down. And as we'll see in later episodes, when we get to the debrief, we might have a conversation where you might want to take notes or write things down to then refer to in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think that for me, one of the last things to be thinking about is about being prepared in terms of the theoretical content that's going to underpin the simulation that's taking place.
Yeah, so generally speaking, if we've done our jobs correctly as educators, you should have had some kind of theory to underpin the practical things that you're doing, so that you don't come into this event unprepared.
Yeah.
But you've got to keep to your end of the bargain, and you've either got to go back to those lecture notes, maybe look at some of the online content that might have been prepared for you, might be a guidance or a policy or something like that, so that you come in prepared.
And I think a reasonable expectation, and we'll come to the basic assumption as part of the briefing in just a minute, is the only assumption that we're going to really be making is that you're intelligent, capable, and care about what you're doing and want to improve regardless. So although you will have done some preparation and some background reading and preparation, no one is going to reasonably expect you to have an encyclopedic knowledge.
So don't overdo it.
Don't overdo it, but also just be satisfied that you have some familiarity with what you're going to be covering.
Great.
Because otherwise, it's going to add to your stress if you're worried about doing the simulation. It's going, if you really don't know what you're talking about, that's going to worry you a bit more.
It's so true, isn't it? Because the more prepared you are, the safer you're going to feel in that environment, and the better the performance we're going to get out of you. Okay, great. So I've done all my bits, and I'm prepared. I'm correct dress and attire. I've got my pen and paper.
You've done your meal prep.
I've had my meal prep, and I've got my breakfast in my belly, and I turn up.
Yeah.
What does the briefing phase of this simulation-based education activity, what does that entail?
Okay, great. So the briefing then. I think the kind of key points for the briefing, and we tried to model best practice here and drawn on some of the kind of most recent available literature. So Somerville, Harrison and Lewis produced a fantastic paper called 12 Tips for the Pre-Brief to Promote Psychological Safety in Simulation. That's an open access paper. You can Google search it and find it. It's available.
We will put a link to the description on the YouTube site, but obviously if this is being embedded into a Blackboard site or a Moodle site or something like that, the educators should hopefully give that access to you as well.
Yeah, and you can just search for it. But that article focused very much on the kind of simulation faculty and the facilitators. So we've tried to sort of make that as relevant as we can for a learner perspective, and thinking about the things that the briefing should entail from their perspective. But in a nutshell, the briefing is an introduction to simulation-based education, or the particular simulation activity that's going to take place. And it should set out the terms of engagement, basically, of the simulation.
But going back to our previous point, if you're prepared, the briefing is preparing you for that simulation activity, isn't it? Again, it's the more prepared you are, the better you're going to perform in that simulation activity, that event, whatever is happening.
Exactly, and that is exactly the function of the briefing, to get that, to make it as abundantly clear as possible what you're trying to achieve and how the simulation is going to play out. So the sorts of things that you can expect, first of all, is hopefully your simulation educators will assert the basic assumption in some way. But what's the basic assumption, Tony?
So the basic assumption is a set of values we set out as simulation educators, and it's basically that we assume that everyone participating is intelligent, capable human beings who are here because they want to do their best. Importantly, regardless of what happens in the actual simulation activity itself. Because one of the risks with simulation, it doesn't always go according to plan. It's not as straightforward as you and I running a lecture or a seminar. We're at the front of the class, because we're asking the learners to be at the center of the performance. Things can go in all sorts of different directions. But that's actually okay.
Yeah.
And actually, it doesn't have to, and then this is something you need to think about as a learner. It doesn't have to go perfectly. And in fact, sometimes when we make mistakes, it provides some of our richest learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the assertion of the basic assumption, or some kind of, statement that relates to it. Look, no one's being judged and assessed here today. We really just want you to do as well as you can.
Yeah.
And we all want you to demonstrate your skills.
It's an opportunity to learn, isn't it?
That's the key. That's the key message in the basic assumption. The next thing that's really important, essential, in fact, to driving any learning event is there should be a statement of what the intended learning outcomes are for the simulation.
So these are the things that I'm trying to, by the end of the session, be able to achieve.
Yeah. And we started this podcast, well, nearly at the beginning, but we started it with some intended learning outcomes for this. And it should be the same for a simulation event.
So you've used the term intended learning outcome there.
Yeah.
Because in simulation, again, because I've hinted, it can go all manner of ways. What we sometimes have is what we call unintended learning outcomes, where something extraordinary perhaps happens in the simulation, and that becomes a new focus for learning.
Yeah.
And that, again, is why simulation is potentially so powerful.
It's so powerful, and also often those unexpected learning events are some of the most profound. And that's why it's really important that learners don't worry about whether it goes perfectly and according to plan, because sometimes, as you've said, those slight side alleys of learning are some of the most useful.
Okay. Another thing that we do in the briefing is what we call preview. So that might mean that we give you an insight to what is going to happen in the simulation activity. That might be the actual scenarios themselves. So in the briefing, we might say something along the lines of these simulation scenarios will all be around managing a cardiac arrest, or they're all around having a difficult conversation with a patient or a parent or a service user. Or it might be, all manner of things. But we might also preview the overall structure of the day. So in some groups, you might have multiple sessions happening simultaneously. There might be rotations of learners through different stations and simulation scenarios. So again, the briefing provides you a kind of a logistical overview of what's about to happen.
Yeah, and it whilst it might not give explicit detail in terms of what's going to unfold, it should provide enough detail that you know roughly where it's heading.
So again, there's no nasty surprises that are going to trip you up.
No, and because those curveballs, what we know from the simulation literature is those curveballs are actually quite unhelpful often when it comes to learning. So there shouldn't be any curveballs when it comes to the simulation event. Everything should happen as it says in the briefing.
Okay.
Something else that's really important for the briefing and for establishing an environment for learning, which is a psychologically safe space, is a statement about confidentiality, that the learning event and the things that are said within it should remain as a kind of contained experience, but that the learning that comes out of that can be used outside of the simulation. So what you would expect to be able to do is to say, oh, we had this simulation where this happened, and I've learned that in my practice, if that happens, I should do this. What you shouldn't be saying is, yeah, when Lawrence did this ridiculous thing.
Inadvertently shocked someone
Right.
when they discharged a defibrillator unsafely.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not about finger pointing
No.
or inadvertently throwing people under the bus. It's about using that shared learning experience to make sure that when you go into clinical practice, you've learned from that and you become a better healthcare professional from it.
Exactly that. So another important facet of the briefing is getting learners used to what the learning environment is going to be, orientating, like a kind of induction to the simulation environment itself. Now that might be just to simply the room and the characters that are going to be in there. If there's some kind of patient simulator or mannequin that's being used, some introduction to the functionality of that mannequin, how it works, where you find the pulses, where the speakers are on the chest if you're going to listen to it, the expectations that your facilitator might have about your engagement with that mannequin, for example. Like, you want you to talk to the mannequin like it's a human being, for
which
example.
is challenging sometimes, isn't it?
Which is really challenging. But there should be that orientation to the learning environment. And that includes both the surroundings, the space. It also includes the team that might be involved. If there's any other roles being played within the simulation, there should be an indication about who they are, what roles they're going to be playing.
And what they're doing. And it could be all manner of people that are doing that. It might be a paid actor. It might be a member of staff. It might even be another person in your cohort that are playing those roles. Yeah. So worth taking into consideration.
And then equipment. It's worth saying the last piece of orientation should be around the equipment that's being used in the simulation. So if whatever that piece of equipment may be,
sometimes it might be real life like for like stuff, which is what you would find in an actual environment. Yep. Sometimes it is simulation specific stuff, which kind of replicates what real world environmental equipment might be like.
And there probably should be a conversation at that stage about the gap between the simulated equipment and the real world equipment and about how...
And managing expectations.
Okay.
So as a learner, then I need to sort of have an expectation that I'm going to play a role in this. And so we talk about having something called a fiction contract, because a simulation is a kind of a created and curated event.
Yes.
Often based on real life events that often educators might have been actively involved in themselves. But to create this believability, this realism, both the educator and the learners have to work together to make this event come to life, if you like.
Yeah.
And so as a learner, I need to buy into that, really, don't I?
Yeah, and that's... Some people find that easier than others. Some people are naturally just find themselves suspending disbelief and getting stuck in and playing the role,
and are quite comfortable in that role. Other people kind of almost makes them feel sick, thinking that they're going to be, because it's like a performance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So you say to some people, "I'd like you to go and stand over there and sing a song," and some people are like, "Yeah, I'm up for it," and other people are like, "Oh no,
you don't want to hear me sing."
But it's because we're acutely aware that the attention is on us. In clinical practice, the focus is on the patient.
Yeah.
In simulation, the focus is on the learner. And so as hard as it might be, that I think is for some people one of the toughest bridges to cross in terms of being a simulation learner, is that commitment that is sometimes needed to make us to believe that you're in it.
And as an educator, what I would love from my learners is that willingness to take part. So when I go, okay, we're going to run the first scenario, who'd like to go first? Often I'm met with a sort of a stone wall of silence and people kind of looking side to side as if to say, who's going to go first? What I'd really like as an educator is for my learners to go, yeah, I'll have a go first.
Yeah.
And I know it takes particularly as a new learner, that's a big leap of faith.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're trying to say again is remember that basic assumption. Remember that this is an opportunity to learn. It's not an opportunity for us to point the finger if something doesn't go to plan.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's working together in harmony. And I think as learners go through their healthcare education and go from year 1 to year 2, year 3, year 4, they become much, much more comfortable at that. And we certainly see by the time you get to year 2 and year 3, simulation, generally speaking, learners are a lot more comfortable in doing it.
Yeah, and we're hoping that we can accelerate that sense of familiarity through these kinds of conversations, and to just make it really abundantly clear to everyone who's going to be doing simulation that this is the ethos that underpins that activity. So
to reiterate then, because I do think it's important from the eyes of the learner, it's okay if I get things wrong in this in the environment.
Yeah, absolutely right. So it's not possible to get it wrong.
Okay.
I would suggest
that's a great way to look at it.
There isn't, there's the purpose of these scenarios are to elicit natural reactions for them to be unpacked and discussed, and that should be made clear in the briefing. It should be clear that, this is what we're hoping might happen, but if it doesn't happen, we'll talk about it and it'll be okay anyway.
Okay.
So I think that's the way to think about it. Is it's like I always say to students, like, you can't fail a formative. Yeah. Because the whole point is that you're there to just learn something, and it's exactly the same for simulation. So yeah, it doesn't matter. So it's natural, I think, to carry some anxiety into that kind of a performance element. If you're about to go on stage, if you're playing in a band or you're an actor or you're about to go on stage, butterflies are a natural and actually very helpful, energizing.
And you may well
force.
Experience those on your placements and in clinical practice as well. So that if we're looking about again developing that fiction contract and that realism, you can't get more real than that, can you?
You can't.
Those nerves and anticipation.
So yeah, absolutely. And in terms of if it's clear that the briefing that is being hosted by the facilitator is coming to an end, and you have any residual worries or anxieties about what's about to happen, or there's a lack of clarity,
ask questions.
Pipe up. Just
I guarantee you there'll be someone else in the room who's thinking the same question.
Because we are just as fallible and vulnerable to getting things wrong as anybody else is, as facilitators. 100%. We might have inadvertently made assumptions about things that or terminology that we've used,
an abbreviation or something that someone doesn't understand.
So just check for clarity if there's anything you're not sure about, and try and enjoy it.
Great. And then that part of the briefing then ends as we introduce the first simulation activity. So you can expect a briefing of what's about to happen in the simulation activity being the kind of end of the briefing session.
Yes, exactly that. And talking of the end of the briefing session,
let's wrap this one up.
Yeah, so I think it's about time we rounded this off. I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover in this episode, and just to revisit those intended learning outcomes. The purpose of these this mini-series on a learner's guide to simulation is to describe the 3 phases of simulation-based education delivery: briefing, action/simulation, and debrief. And we've focused on briefing in this one. To consider what you need to think about in preparation for simulation, and to recall the key elements of the briefing.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you for listening. We hope to see you on the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.